The voyage of the Blue Marlin began with the loud ringing of a large bell mounted beside the ship's bow. At the captain's command, the anchor was hoisted, and the ship's 3 massive sails were unfurled. As they caught the wind and tightened, the sails began pulling the ship forward. While the crew busied themselves with their duties, Turan, the knight hired to protect the ship, leisurely lay on the bed in his cabin, reading a book. The first book he read detailed the rules and regulations aboard the ship. Starting with the hierarchy of the crew, it explained the various positions on the ship, followed by unwritten rules and superstitions, of which there were quite a few peculiar ones. Not allowing women aboard, not looking down at the sea at night, not whistling. There were so many things that weren't allowed. It was almost ridiculous. Moreover, the punishments for breaking the rules were all rather severe. Most of them involved tying the offender to the mast and whipping them. Next, Turan picked up a book about mermaids. Perhaps because it had been written near a place where mermaids were said to live, it contained far more detailed and specific content than the one he had seen at the Orem City Library. It included tales of the magical mirror that connected the North Sea and South Sea, as well as stories of mermaid royalty who could transform into giant fish. For a book he had picked up on a whim, it turned out to be surprisingly interesting, allowing him to pass the time rather enjoyably. After about 2 hours of reading, Turan began to feel cramped in the small cabin. He closed his book and stepped out onto the deck. By then, the land had long disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the vast expanse of blue ocean stretching in all directions. Because of this, even though the ship was cutting through the wind and moving forward, it didn't quite feel like it was progressing.
"Oh my, Sir Knight has come out."
As soon as Turan stepped onto the deck, Osban, the first mate, greeted him warmly. Thanks to the book he had just read, Turan knew that Osban held the second highest position on the ship after the captain. From managing all the cargo to commanding the vessel in the captain's absence, his duties were extensive, though his overly servile manner made him seem somewhat lightweight for such a position.
"I just came out to get some fresh air. Staying inside feels too stifling."
Osban laughed awkwardly.
"Actually, merchant ships aren't usually this cramped."
He explained that the shipowner, driven by greed, had excessively expanded the cargo hold at the expense of the crew's accommodations. Normally, even senior crew would have slightly larger rooms than Turan's cabin, but on this ship they had to share one room between them. Hearing this, Turan decided to feel grateful that he at least had a cabin to himself.
"I heard it takes 20 days to a month to reach the Enril Desert."
"But that's assuming favorable winds and calm waves. The North Sea is a notoriously rough place."
Osban shared that he had sailed the South Sea in his younger days. The waves there were mild and the winds gentle, which made ships slower but the voyages far more predictable. The North Sea was the exact opposite. Favorable winds could send a ship flying as fast as the wind itself, but the risks of straying off course or sinking were far greater, and pirates and creatures like mermaids swarmed wherever they could, leaving no stretch of water truly safe.
"Still, with you on board, Sir Knight, I feel much more at ease."
Though he had never witnessed Turan's abilities, Osban loudly declared that no pirates or mermaids would dare approach with Turan aboard. The knight responded with a wry smile but didn't cut him off. Stopping the flattery might sour the mood unnecessarily, and the lower-ranked sailors nearby seemed to take real comfort in the first mate's words. The exaggerated praise was likely a deliberate attempt to steady his crew. Truthfully, the confidence wasn't entirely baseless. There wouldn't be many enemies capable of attacking a trade ship guarded by someone of Turan's caliber, someone ranked in the upper middle tier among nobles. After listening for a while, Turan raised a question that had been on his mind.
"I don't really understand why the value of knights here is so high. Wouldn't it be more profitable for House Carmine to station knights on their trade ships at a reasonable price to prevent plundering? After all, they'll be collecting taxes on every trade anyway."
Even in House Arabian, knights from vassal houses handled bodyguard duties. Surely their pay wasn't so exorbitant that trade ships couldn't afford them.
"Well, that's—"
Osban hesitated, scratching his cheek, then replied in a careful tone.
"With all due respect, this line of work, sailing, puts us at constant risk of death, doesn't it? When we sailors lose contact with someone we knew for a few years, we don't think they must have gone somewhere far. We think, they must have died. So
you're saying that even knights are scared because, in the end, if the ship sinks, they'll die too?"
Osban protested.
"No, that's not quite what I meant."
"No, now that I think about it, you're right. Every situation has its own reasons."
Thinking it through, even he wouldn't easily make his way back to land if the ship suddenly sank in the middle of the ocean. Seawater could be purified into drinking water with magic, and fish could be caught and cooked for food. but swimming all the way to shore would be a monumental task, not to mention figuring out where to sleep. If even someone like Turan felt that way, ordinary knights would fare far worse. Once their magic ran out, they'd be no different from regular humans, and would eventually drown. Perhaps House Carmine had once actively deployed knights on trade ships, then raised their fees when the losses became unsustainable.
It sounds like you're having an interesting discussion.
At that moment, Captain Pyers, the ship's commander, emerged from below deck, adjusting his eye patch. He gave Turan a slight bow of his head.
I've hosted a distinguished guest aboard, yet I haven't even greeted you properly for hours. I hope these idiots haven't caused you any discomfort.
Turan shook his head.
Not at all. I've been having some interesting conversations.
That's a relief.
Pyers turned.
Osban, check the storage for the grain. It looks like there might be a leak. Rearrange things.
Aye, sir.
Osban replied with a salute, pounding his chest with his fist before heading below deck. Watching him go, Turan seized the opportunity to ask Pyers a question he had intended to raise earlier.
Now that I think about it, what do you mainly trade in the Enril Desert? I'm not very familiar with the region.
A variety of goods. The desert is a true desert. Nothing but sand as far as the eye can see. They can't grow cotton there, so cotton and muslin sell well. And ever since overland trade with Arabian was cut off, grains have also been in high demand. But honestly, the real profit is made on the return trip rather than the journey there.
The return trip?
Turan asked.
Yes, the goods needed in the Enril Desert are all heavy and bulky compared to their price. But the items we bring back to Abacha are high in value and easy to store, mostly spices and gems, so we sleep far more comfortably on the way home.
It's a shame I won't be on board for the return trip. I would have liked to experience that.
Are you planning to stay in the Enril Desert for a long time?
Pyers chuckled at the remark.
Yes, most likely.
Turan said. The truth was, he still hadn't figured out how to uncover his roots in the lands of Zahar. Storming into the main estate without knowing his father's identity was akin to blindly reaching into a box, not knowing whether it held treasure or a blade. If he ruled out that reckless approach, the only clues he had were a portrait of his mother and a few keepsakes. Using just those, finding anything might take years or even longer in the vast expanse of the desert. Turan's first voyage was fortunately smooth for the entire week. No storms, no tidal waves, no pirate or mermaid attacks, which of course meant that it was a string of uneventful and boring days.
Is this the fifth rope?
Yes. When strong headwinds blow from the front, we need to loosen this and those two middle ropes over there to quickly gather the sails. If we don't, the ship will just spin in place.
Oh, I see.
Having finished all his books, Turan began satisfying his thirst for knowledge by approaching idle crew members one by one to learn various techniques, starting with how the ship was operated. At first, the sailors were flustered that a knight, someone akin to a god in their eyes, wanted to learn skills meant for lowly sailors. But after seeing how attentively he listened, and how quickly he retained what he learned, they enthusiastically shared their tricks and techniques with him. In truth, given his youthful appearance, Turan seemed like one of the youngest among the sailors, which made teaching him feel less out of place.
Time for a meal. All right, let's eat and get back to it. Everyone, to the dining hall.
Meals were served 3 times a day, and as expected, the quality and quantity were far inferior to meals on land. The ship's food storage had not been generously allocated, and most of the preserved food was of poor quality to begin with. Even the captain's cabin wasn't spacious, so Captain Pyers and Turan ate in the largest dining hall on board alongside the crew.
At least they don't skip the pickled cabbage. Without it, we'd all have died from gum disease ages ago.
Gum disease?
Turan asked.
Yes, sir. It's a disease where your gums bleed and you die from it. Eating sour foods cures it. Since fruit spoil too quickly, pickled cabbage is the best option, though it tastes absolutely awful.
He laughed as he said it.
That's interesting. How did people find that out?
Well, I suppose someone figured it out at some point, and word spread. Before that was known, they used to eat mermaids raw, they say.
Turan went quiet. The image of dark elf necromancers chewing on humans flashed through his mind, and he suddenly lost his appetite. He put down his food. At that moment, a loud shout came from the sailor observing from the masthead.
Ship spotted. 2 o'clock direction. Medium-sized vessel.
One of the sailors who had been eating jumped to his feet.
What? Is it pirates?
A beat of silence, then the reply came from above.
I can't tell. There's no noble house flag flying.
Feels like pirates to me. I knew something was off. The weather's been too nice without any rain. Prepare for battle.
Renak didn't wait for confirmation. His command, the sailors who had been eating, leaped to their feet and ran up to the deck or began distributing weapons without waiting for further instruction. First, Mate Osban turned the Blue Marlin to port, trying to avoid the approaching ship. Meanwhile, Captain Pyers, though slightly tense, maintained a composed demeanor as he stayed seated at the table and watched his crew move. Turan slipped through the bustling sailors and stepped onto the deck. Using detection magic, he began scanning the approaching vessel. At a glance, it was slightly smaller than the Blue Marlin, with 4 sails. Judging by its speed, it was a little faster than their own ship. Moments later, the unidentified vessel turned to the right, swinging onto a direct pursuit course.
Damn it, they really are pirates.
One of the crew called out.
What should we do, Captain? Should we try to shake them off? They're a bit faster. If the chase goes on too long, they might catch us. If the wind is in our favor, we might be able to dock at a nearby island before that happens.
Turan noticed Captain Pyers' gaze sweep over him briefly. Though Turan had proven his abilities to some extent, Pyers seemed uneasy. He hadn't yet witnessed Turan's combat prowess in action.
Can you handle this?
The captain asked.
Unless there's a knight or noble on their side, it won't be a problem.
All right, then. Turn the ship around. We'll face them head on.
Pyers set his jaw.
Long live Sir Knight. Kill them all, sir.
Turan's confident answer seemed to steady the crew, who, though slightly nervous, greeted the order with a surge of trust. Shortly after, the Blue Marlin swung back toward the approaching ship, and the 2 vessels rapidly closed the distance between them. The sailors aboard the pirate ship seemed momentarily flustered by the sudden reversal, but their aggression didn't waver.
Hey there, stop your ship. If you do, we'll spare your lives.
When the gap narrowed to a few hundred meters, a man standing at the bow bellowed across the water. Hearing this, Turan turned to Renak beside him.
If we surrender, do they really let us live?
It depends on their mood, from what I've heard.
The bosun said.
As I thought.
It wasn't surprising. Expecting pirates, men who ignored the law, to keep their promises was absurd. That realization freed Turan of any moral hesitation. Humans who killed others for their own greed were no better than wolves that needed to be hunted. The 2 ships drew closer and closer. When the gap narrowed to around 30 or 40 meters, Turan leaped with superhuman strength and landed squarely on the pirate ship's deck. The wood splintered beneath him with a thunderous crash. The pirates stared at the destruction, their expressions blank with disbelief. When Turan first landed on the deck, the pirates were so dumbfounded that they couldn't even speak for a few seconds. The sight of a human leaping tens of meters and crossing between ships was so surreal that their brains momentarily refused to comprehend it. But a few seconds later, one unknown pirate broke the silence by shouting in a loud voice.
Kill him, fight.
70 or so pirates approached, brandishing every kind of weapon that could harm a person, swords, axes, anything with an edge or a point. Turan was inwardly baffled. When a wizard suddenly appears and demonstrates such overwhelming power, it would usually break the will to fight, leading to surrender. So why weren't they backing down? However, just because he was puzzled, didn't mean it would bring any significant change to the battle. Even if a bear flinched when a mouse suddenly attacked, that wouldn't give the mouse a chance to win. As Turan stretched out his hand toward the other side of the deck, a blue wave responded to his will and surged up. In an instant, it released scorching heat and transformed into sharp ice spikes that seemed capable of piercing anything.
That is Rue.
Before the word run could even be completed, dozens of ice spikes rained down on the pirates gathered on the deck. The result was utterly gruesome. Some died instantly with their heads pierced, others choked and flailed with their necks impaled, and many collapsed with their chests or abdomens punctured. In an instant, more than 16 pirates lost their lives or were incapacitated. And this was after Turan deliberately restrained his power to a much weaker level than usual, all to maintain the act of being a knight. Humans who were not born with the power of magic were truly fragile.
Don't chicken out, you bastards. If we don't kill him, we're the ones who'll die.
While the pirates at the front screamed in agony, skewered by ice spikes, someone in the back shouted that. Only then did Turan understand why the pirates were resisting so desperately. They too knew that Turan wouldn't spare their lives. As the pirates rushed in frantically, Turan gathered some of the water he had drawn from the sea and formed a long ice greatsword in his hand. He could have simply rained down more ice spikes and wiped them all out. But if he was going to pretend to be a knight, he He needed to conserve his strength and engage in close combat to sell the act. A head was severed with a wet crunch, and the body collapsed limply to the ground. Flesh and bone were no obstacles against the strength imbued in the great sword which could crush even metal. After cutting down one pirate, Turan parried incoming attacks with practiced movements, slicing another's throat. He then took a large step back to create some distance before extending the greatsword to slash through 3 enemies simultaneously. Unlike his sparring sessions with Haram, there was no thrill of combat in this. The pirates' physical abilities were incomparable to Turan's, and their combat skills were even more crude. In the midst of this, a few of the pirates' attacks managed to reach Turan's body. After all, with only 2 hands and a single sword, it was impossible to block every attack flying at him from all directions while deliberately limiting his strength and speed to that of a knight. If he were a master like Haram, it might have been a different story. But these attacks weren't even worth trying to block. A particularly large pirate thrust his entire strength into a strike aimed at Turan's exposed neck, only for the blade to skid off, unable to even scratch his skin. Others slashed and stabbed at his shoulders, chest, and back, but none of their attacks had any real effect. A noble's body was not so weak that it could be pierced by a mere sharp piece of metal swung by a commoner. Even without the Guardian magic artifact, the result likely wouldn't have been much different. After about 3 minutes, Turan realized that he was the only one still standing on the deck. The deck, now a sea of blood, was filled with nothing but groans and cries of pain.
Arg. Mom, it's cold, Mom. Please, spare me.
Looking down at the fallen pirates, Turan threw the ice greatsword onto the ground. At that moment, the sound of metal clinking echoed as a few grappling hooks latched onto the deck. Because the Blue Marlin had circled back around after Turan jumped ahead, and the 2 ships had crossed paths, it had only now caught up with the pirate ship. Captain Pyers, the one-eyed captain of the Blue Marlin, skillfully balanced as he walked along the ropes, surveyed the pirate ship's deck, and clicked his tongue.
It's over, Captain.
So it seems. This is well.
Pyers had a look on his face as if he wanted to say a lot but couldn't find the words. He was probably beginning to suspect that Turan wasn't just an ordinary knight. But unlike him, the crew members approaching from behind were brimming with excitement and shouting incoherently.
If this is amazing, long live Sir Knight. Ooh-ah! Those bastards. Serves them right.
Some of the sailors, unable to contain their joy, kicked at the sprawled corpses of pirates and ended up falling over. At that moment, one of the crew members, noticing Turan's state, spoke up.
But, shouldn't you go see the ship's doctor first? That's right. Actually, it might be hard for you to move. Let's call the ship's doctor here instead.
The sailors were understandably fussing over him after all. Turan's entire body was drenched in blood, and his clothes were torn all over, making him look like he had been gravely injured. Turan smiled and shook his head.
No need to worry. I'm not hurt anywhere. This is all the pirate's blood.
Is that really true? My goodness. As expected of a descendant of the gods.
In truth, if he had been an ordinary knight, his bare skin would have been torn when pierced by spears and swords, and if it had been a vital area like the eyes, it could have been a fatal blow. Of course, the crew members didn't know all this, so they just concluded that knights were indeed amazing.
Then may I go in and rest first, Captain?
Of course. Boatswain.
Boatswain Renak, the Blue Marlin's gravel-voiced second-in-command, shouted back with a red-faced grin.
Yes, sir. Listen up, you maggots. Start by cleaning the deck. Whether they're alive or dead, throw them all overboard.
While the sailors handled the aftermath, Turan returned to the Blue Marlin and took off his tattered clothes to clean himself. The fact that it was a ship full of men made it convenient for him to wash on the deck without any concern for modesty.
Do you happen to have any spare clothes I could borrow?
Here you go. Although they might smell a bit, is that all right with you?
I don't mind.
Turan had an exceptionally keen sense of smell due to his bloodline traits, but that didn't mean he was particularly sensitive to bad odors. After all, the human sense of smell quickly grows accustomed to new odors, so after the initial encounter one barely notices them. If that weren't the case, he wouldn't have been able to endure his ragged state when he first stayed in Orem City. After cleaning himself and changing into a sailor's sweaty clothes, Turan set aside his blood-soaked original clothes in his cabin. Thanks to the magic Ashiz had cast on them, his clothes would soon return to their original state. Judging by their current condition, it would likely only take a few hours. When Turan climbed back up to the deck, Captain Pyers had already returned to the Blue Marlin.
We're still searching the ship, but it seems that vessel was a merchant ship that disappeared from Abacha a few years ago. The pirates must have seized it and put it to use.
I see.
It would be better to sell it.
Turan gave Pyers a puzzled look, to which Pyers smiled and explained. Come to think of it, such a ship wouldn't be cheap. Even though the battle wasn't much of a fight, the thought of claiming the ship had momentarily slipped his mind.
What's usually done in these situations?
You could sail back to Abacha and demand compensation from the original owners in exchange for returning the ship. Alternatively, you could sell it in the Enril Desert. But I think selling it on one of the islands along our current route would be the most practical option. The northern archipelago always has a high demand for sailing ships. Goods usually fetch the highest prices where they're needed most.
The North Sea archipelago, as its name suggests, consisted of islands scattered across the middle of the North Sea and served as a trade hub connecting the northwest, central, and northeast regions of the world. The Blue Marlin was also scheduled to stop at one of those islands soon to restock on food and water. Captain Pyers spoke with a slightly troubled expression.
Thing is, to move a ship of that size, you need to mobilize quite a large crew.
So you're saying transportation costs are needed. How much should I pay?
Pyers widened his single eye in surprise. He hadn't expected Turan to agree so readily.
There's no way I can haul that ship alone. If I use people, I should compensate them, shouldn't I?
Over the past week, Turan had learned enough about handling a sailing ship to understand how difficult it was to operate one as large as the captured vessel. Of course, extra crew members were always assigned in case of fatalities during rough voyages, but operating an additional ship of similar size was no easy task. The workload and watch shifts would likely double. Exploiting people without compensation would hardly be acceptable.
In that case, perhaps 1/10 of the profit.
How about 2/10? Could I ask you to handle the sale as well?
Of course. I know plenty of people in the area, so I'll make sure to get you a good price.
Seeing the delight on Captain Pyers' face, Turan suddenly realized a new problem. His backpack was already bulging with gold coins. Where would he store the money from selling an entire ship? It seemed he'd have to purchase something small yet valuable on the island where they would dock, assuming such items were available for sale, of course. A short while later, Captain Pyers seemed to have said something to the crew, as they once again cheered and shouted praises at Turan. It was likely an encouragement to work hard, with the promise that a portion of the ship's sail would be shared with them. Although Turan was the only one who fought in the battle, the victory was celebrated with drinks shared among the crew. However, just as the merriment reached its peak, a sudden commotion erupted from the pirate ship tethered nearby by ropes. One of the sailors, looking utterly dazed, shouted in alarm.
Captain, a mermaid, it's a mermaid.
What? Even mermaids have come to attack us now. Where?
Captain Pyers exclaimed in shock. Having been unbothered for the past week, to now face both pirates and mermaids in quick succession felt too unfair. But the sailor's next words clarified the situation.
No, that's not it. The pirates were keeping a mermaid captive. Underneath the ship.
When Turan returned to the pirate ship, Boatswain Renak was stripping and shaking down the crew members who had gone below deck, ensuring that those sent to search the ship wouldn't pocket any valuable items they might find. Though it was already nearing early winter in the North Sea, making such an ordeal quite harsh, no one complained. After all, who would dare grumble when there was a chance that someone might try to steal from the knight who had just slaughtered 70 pirates?
So there's a mermaid on board?
Renak gave a firm nod.
Yes. I haven't gone down to see it myself, just received the report.
Good job. Turan, would you like to check it out?
Of course.
Naturally, if a mermaid did exist, its ownership would belong to Turan as well. As Turan entered the lower cabin of the ship, he asked Pyers a question.
Are mermaids worth a lot of money?
I hear that a beautiful female mermaid can sell for an astronomical price. Wealthy collectors of rare creatures go absolutely crazy for them.
Turan recalled the characteristics of mermaids he had read about in books. They were said to sing among the reefs, luring ships in and sinking them to feast on the crew. Was their voice truly so enchanting, or did they possess some kind of special power to mesmerize humans? He would soon find out for himself.
This way.
Turan descended into the ship's hold and stopped cold at the scene before him. The mermaid the sailors spoke of turned out to be nothing more than a young boy, likely no older than 12 or 13. Beside him, Turan could hear Pyers clicking his tongue.
A male, huh? Male mermaids probably won't fetch much, unless he's some legendary royal capable of transforming into a fish.
At that moment, the mermaid boy, having overheard Pyers, shouted angrily,
"How dare you? A male, you say? I am none other than Armenia, the 47th Prince of North Esterdale. Show some respect, you land dwellers."
Indeed, the voice of Armania, the mermaid boy, was more beautiful than any human voice Turan had ever heard in his life. It was akin to the sound of instruments played in the background during a theater performance. But what was more surprising than the voice itself was the content of his words.
Is he saying he's royalty?
Pyers replied with a skeptical expression.
Seems like it, although he might just be bluffing in hopes that we won't kill him and will sell him alive instead.
Still, considering that the pirates had bothered to capture a male mermaid, which wasn't worth much money, there was a chance he might be telling the truth, Pyers added with a serious face.
Can you transform into a fish, Mermaid Prince?
I can't do that.
Why not?
Because I've been tied up out here on land. I need to be in the ocean in my full condition to transform.
Turan and Pyers exchanged a glance, their thoughts perfectly aligned without needing words. This little brat was clearly scheming to escape.
What do you want to do?
Turan kept his voice level.
Mermaids quite often eat people, right?
Yes.
Then I'll kill him. If he's not worth any money, there's no point in keeping him.
If he's truly a prince, wouldn't it be a shame to waste him?
We can't just release him to confirm whether he's telling the truth. If he can't transform, he won't even sell.
Without hesitation, Turan reached out toward the mermaid boy. Even though he was planning to kill him, given that the boy looked like a child, he thought it best to ensure the death was swift and painless. Sensing the danger, the mermaid boy stepped back and screamed in panic.
I've never eaten a human before. I have no intention of doing so. If you spare me, I'll give you treasure.
Treasure?
Turan paused at the word, and Armania brightened with hope.
Yes, treasure. The treasure left behind by the Priya, gods you worship.
When encountering myths, one of the most common stories is about treasures used by the gods. A staff that could summon flames strong enough to dry up a river with a single swing, armor so impenetrable that even a god could not harm the wearer, and a bottle that endlessly poured out an elixir capable of reviving the dead. Such magical artifacts of the Priya god tribe, otherwise known as sacred relics, numbered only a few dozen across the entire world. Of course, not all of these items were immensely powerful, but some were treasures so valuable that even the heads of great noble families guarded them with their lives and passed them down through generations. But for a mere mermaid who had been captured by pirates to claim to possess something like that. Sensing the sarcasm in Turan's tone, Turan, the noble who had taken charge of questioning the captive, the mermaid's distinctive blue skin turned a shade of purple. It seemed to be a reaction similar to how humans flush red with anger or embarrassment. The self-proclaimed prince, Armani shouted.
I'm not lying. I really discovered it in a cave where one of your gods had died in battle. I originally intended to report it to my father, but I got caught because I was tricked by you lot.
You discovered a god that died in battle. Explain in more detail.
When Turan glared at him with a serious expression, Armani, looking frightened, stammered as he answered.
A man with blue hair. His body had been pierced by the fang of a giant sea serpent, and he was dead. But he had also pierced the enemy's head with his hand. Everything else had decayed over time, but the round metal object he wore on his waist had no rust and remained perfectly intact. It must be a treasure among treasures.
Why didn't you take the object right away?
I couldn't touch it. Whenever I tried to approach, some unknown force pushed my body away.
Why are you so sure it was a god?
Only a god among you would be capable of killing and being killed by a giant sea serpent.
The giant sea serpent was a species that mermaid in the past revered as gods, a massive snake whose body was dozens of meters long as its name suggested. Of course, it had long since disappeared into the annals of history. Still, to be locked in mortal combat with a monster once worshipped as a god and remain preserved in that state underwater without decay. Even if it wasn't truly the remains of a god, if Armani's words were true, something extraordinary undoubtedly existed. Realizing he was growing excited, Turan took a deep breath to calm himself, then carefully reviewed his thoughts. Was it possible he had been bewitched by the voice of the mermaid? Would his judgment remain the same in a clear-headed state? As he organized his thoughts, a question suddenly came to mind.
Now that I think about it, you said you were tricked and captured? How exactly did that happen?
At this question, Armani abruptly shut his mouth and lowered his head. Though they were different species, their facial features weren't so different, so Turan could discern a faint trace of shame in Armani's expression.
You know how your people have that trick to lure out those who live in the water, using metal hooks tied to strings?
You mean fishing?
Yeah, that. Normally, I could easily recognize such a thing, but in my transformed state, my instincts got the better of me.
In other words, this mermaid prince had been caught by pirates while transformed into a fish. It was an utterly ridiculous story, but somehow it made sense after hearing it. The pirates had probably been startled when the fish they caught suddenly turned into a mermaid, and they decided to capture him. Even if they were ignorant fools as sailors, they would have heard that Royal Mermaid fetched an exorbitantly high price. Whether it was true or just an excuse, the only plausible reason to imprison a male mermaid who couldn't even demonstrate his transformation abilities was that.
Did you perhaps tell the pirates about all of this too?
I did, but none of them listened. They just said, "Don't talk nonsense about a dead god's corpse," and laughed it off.
That was the most normal reaction. Turan, having personally interacted with the librarian at Orem's library, could sense the existence of the Priya god tribe. However, for ordinary people, gods were nothing more than mythological beings found in scriptures. Even Turan himself wasn't entirely convinced whether the mermaid's words were genuine or just random lies spun in desperation to save his own life. So why would anyone abandon a safe profit to take a dangerous gamble?
What about the sailors who discovered you earlier?
I didn't. No, I couldn't. The moment they saw me, they shouted that there was a mermaid and ran off.
This meant that the only ones aware of this information were him and Captain Pyers. Turan glanced at Pyers, the ship's captain, who had been listening to the conversation with a blank expression. Feeling Turan's gaze, Pyers spoke with a stiff face.
I didn't hear a thing.
It was as if he feared Turan might kill him for spreading the information around. Of course, Turan had no such intention. It wasn't that he trusted Pyers' integrity, but rather his own strength. On land, there were many nobles stronger than Turan, but on this sea he was one of the absolute strongest. That is, unless he suddenly ran into someone from the House Carmine or a similarly powerful bloodline.
You don't need to be so tense. For now, I'd like to keep this guy alive for a little longer. What do you think?
It shouldn't be a problem. If it were, those pirate bastards wouldn't have been able to keep this mermaid imprisoned in the first place.
Pyers, still with a grave expression, calmly offered his opinion. He had a point. The fact that an ordinary human group of pirates had captured him suggested that this mermaid boy didn't possess any notable combat abilities.
Come to think of it, those pirates are ridiculous. They could have gotten rich just by selling this mermaid, but they had to lose their lives while pirating instead.
Greed is what drives those scum, after all. Besides, they likely never imagined that a ship of this size would have not only a knight, but also a noble on board.
Turan tilted his head slightly at Pyers' remark and then asked in return,
Was I too much?
Yes. The others may not realize it since they've rarely, if ever, seen a knight in battle, but I know. It's not easy to come out unscathed against that many opponents.
Why was Pyers suddenly hinting that he'd realized Turan's true identity? It was clearly a plea. I know how powerful you are, so I wouldn't dare attempt something foolish like coveting a legendary treasure in your presence. When Turan slightly nodded to signal that he understood the implied message, Pyers visibly relaxed, his shoulders losing their tension. After diffusing the potential conflict, Turan turned his attention back to the mermaid boy.
Do you happen to know where in the North Sea the remains of that god are? If I show you a map, could you point it out?
Even as he asked, Turan doubted the mermaid would understand what North Sea meant. There was no way they had ever seen a human map. Contrary to his expectations, Armani tilted his head slightly and then straightforwardly revealed what he knew.
It's not that far. About 500 kilometers south of here.
500 kilometers south?
Turan's eyes widened in surprise at the response. First, how could a creature locked in the ship's hold know their current location? Second, how was he using human measurements for direction and distance? When Turan voiced his doubts, the reply he received was underwhelming.
I'm not sure. It's just the system we've always used. Was it something made by your people?
Probably. Captain, were you aware of this?
This is the first I've heard of it. We usually don't ask mermaids such things. Perhaps those high-ranking individuals who keep mermaid as pets might know.
As far as Turan knew, the calendar system, measurement units, and other standards used by humans all originated from the old empire. Perhaps such things were remnants from a time even earlier than the ancient era, when humans were enslaved by other races. There was almost no recorded history of that period, not even in Orum's library. It might also explain why these races used the same language as humans.
Anyway, 500 kilometers to the south.
That would put it not too far from Miguel Island. Even accounting for some error, it shouldn't be more than 100 kilometers off.
Miguel Island, one of the largest islands in the North Sea archipelago, was the location where the Blue Marlin was set to restock supplies and sell off the pirate ship. In other words, it was within a distance that they could reasonably visit if they made the time.
For now, let's keep him confined a bit longer, and think about it. There's always the chance he might spread some strange story, so I'll manage him myself.
After much deliberation, Turan decided to postpone making a decision. He simply didn't know enough about the mermaid yet to decide anything immediately. In truth, Turan wasn't entirely convinced by the words of the mermaid boy, Armani. After all, weren't their kind one of the races, like the Dark Elves, that had once enslaved and eaten humans in ancient times? What he did trust, however, was the boy's desperation. For a being with intelligence comparable to humans, one's life was often reason enough to offer anything.
Here, it's time for your meal.
Thank you, kind devil.
It was the second day since they'd captured Armani. After realizing that Turan was a wizard, and a noble at that, Armani had taken to calling him a devil. Come to think of it, the dark elf necromancers they had encountered before had also called Turan and Ashiz devils, hadn't they? When Turan asked what the term meant, he received a peculiar response.
Your ancestors came from beyond and destroyed our once perfect world. That's why.
Yet, for someone who spoke of devils destroying his perfect world, Armani ate the food Turan brought him without much resistance. Turan had initially wondered if he should catch some fish for him, assuming that might be a mermaid's preference. But fortunately, Armani ate regular human food without issue.
For someone who eats this just fine, why bother eating humans at all?
I'm not sure. I've never eaten humans before. Maybe the lower class ones do it because they don't have enough to eat. When I return, I'll ask my father about it.
Though Turan had never promised to let him go, Armani spoke as if it were only natural that he'd return to the mermaid kingdom. Every time he answered like this, Turan felt conflicted. For a species that supposedly ate humans, Armani's mannerisms and speech were surprisingly human-like. He was nothing like the Dark Elves, who had immediately tried to kill Turan on sight. From then on, Turan continued to converse with Armenia about a wide range of topics. From the differences between the customs and social systems of merpeople he had read about in books and reality, to the existence of the legendary mirror connecting the North and South Sea mermaid kingdoms, to stories about ancient mermaid mythology.
Ah, by the way, how far is it now, from that place?
About 65 kilometers west?
Over the past few days of conversations, Turan had learned how Armani was able to know his location. The mermaid had an instinctive ability to sense directions and positions while at sea. Once they remembered a place, they could always find their way back to it. While they were deeply engrossed in their conversation, a knocking sound came from above, the wooden boards tapping softly.
I'll be back.
Bye.
With Armani waving him off cheerfully, anyone watching would never suspect that Turan had confined the mermaid in the hold of the ship. When Turan climbed out of the hold, Osban, the first mate who had come aboard to oversee the pirate ship, greeted him.
Sir Knight, we've arrived at Miguel Island.
Already? I guess it's time to head up.
Yes, sir.
After securing the entrance to the hold where Armani was confined with thick chains, Turan climbed to the deck. Beyond the dark night sea he could see a large island and several sailing ships docked at the pier ahead of it. After the two ships docked at the pier, Turan lightly leapt a few times toward the Blue Marlin. Captain Pyers, who had been staying on a different ship and hadn't seen Turan for 2 days, greeted him briefly before getting straight to the point.
Have you reached a decision?
Yes.
What he was asking was simple. Would Turan trust the mermaid's words and go searching for an unidentified treasure, or would he sell the creature to one of the island's influential figures? Instead of answering directly, Turan asked a question in return.
How long do you plan to stay on this island?
Unless something unusual happens. About a day or 2.
Allowing the crew to rest after the 9-day voyage was also an important task. Though it wasn't a concern with Turan on board, it was common for overworked sailors to stage a mutiny, killing the captain and turning to piracy themselves.
Perfect. Could you arrange for me to borrow a small boat? Just enough for 2 people.
Don't tell me.
Fortunately, it doesn't seem to be too far from here. I'll go and check it out tonight.
A few dozen minutes after landing on Miguel Island, Captain Pyers discreetly sent a few crew members to procure a small rowboat. It was just the right size to fit 2 people snugly, as requested. Turan, the knight traveling with the crew, his whole body wrapped in cloth to conceal the mermaid's features of Armani, moved onto the rowboat together with him. Armani, the young mermaid boy they had brought aboard, gazed upward the moment they were clear of the ship.
It's the moon. How long has it been since I've seen it?
The mermaid murmured as he looked at the full moon hanging in the sky. Even he himself didn't know how long he had been trapped under the pirate ship. After all, no sunlight or moonlight ever reached the ship's hold. He could only guess it had been a month or 2, judging by the amount of food he ate and the time he spent sleeping.
Oh, it looks like Sir Knight is going somewhere.
He said he had some business to attend to. He'll be back soon, so don't worry about it.
Some of the crew members were surprised to see Turan boarding the rowboat with Armani, but as soon as Captain Pyers spoke firmly, they lost interest. After all, it wasn't like he was getting on a large sailing ship, and there was no way he'd sail off alone in such a tiny boat.
More importantly, are the preparations for landing complete?
Of course.
Good. Tonight, you can have fun wherever you want, whether it's at the tavern or elsewhere. Anyone who doesn't report back tomorrow should be ready to face the whip.
The crew erupted in cheers. Amid the noise, Turan fastened Armani's arms and legs to the boat using the chains he had prepared. Armani complied quietly and asked for confirmation.
You'll really set me free if we find the treasure, right?
Yes.
Even if it turns out to be something not very useful, it's not my fault.
Got it. Now focus on guiding the way.
Shortly afterward, the rowboat carrying the 2 began making its way across the dark sea. At first, Turan simply used magic with the feeling of physically moving the boat forward. However, he soon changed his approach. The trick was to direct the force not at the boat itself but at the water around it. By pushing aside the water ahead while simultaneously propelling the boat forward using the water at its rear and sides, the effort was reduced significantly, and the boat moved much more smoothly. Upon trying it for himself, he found that navigating such a small boat with magic wasn't as bad as he had imagined. Of course, given all the issues it presented, it wasn't suitable for long-distance voyages.
By the way, I understand the way there, but how are you planning to find your way back? Without me, you won't be able to navigate.
Are you worried about me?
No, I'm worried you won't release me because of it.
I've already thought of something, so don't worry.
Turan pulled a small compass from his pocket. It was something he had received in advance from Captain Pyers, and according to it, they were moving slightly southwest. On the way back, he just needed to head slightly northeast to return to the starting point. Of course, there might be some margin of error, but with a detection spell, they could scan a radius of over 12 kilometers. Well, if he still ended up getting lost, he could simply head straight south and eventually hit land somewhere. Probably.
I feel like jumping into the water.
Resist it.
Turan lightly rebuked the mermaid boy, who was grumbling as he stared down at the sea and focused his attention on steering the boat. They continued for what felt like an hour or an hour and a half. Gradually, something began to appear ahead of them. It was an island so small it couldn't even compare to Miguel Island. It looked like an uninhabited island, barely a rock rising from the water.
Is that it?
That's right.
All right, then hold on a moment.
Before landing, Turan stopped the boat and scooped up a handful of seawater with his hand, activating a detection spell. The sensory input he used was smell, and the target of the detection was a mermaid. Closing his eyes, he scooped up seawater 3 or 4 times, sniffing it carefully, but he didn't sense anything. At the very least, this meant that Armani hadn't deceived him and brought him to the mermaid's base. Watching Turan's actions, Armani tilted his head in confusion.
What are you doing?
Just checking.
When Turan first attempted to use a detection spell underwater, what had flustered him was the absence of usable sensory inputs. Smell was meaningless since water entering his nose would only cause his eyes to tear up. Sight and hearing were also far more limited underwater, compared to on land due to interference from the water. In contrast, the method of scooping water and sniffing it, while not capable of pinpointing precise locations, made it easier to confirm the presence of a target. Even now, if he changed the detection target to something like a whale or a shark, he could immediately sense a peculiar scent rising. Now that safety had been confirmed, there was no need for hesitation. He docked the boat at a suitable spot on the shore and stepped onto the uninhabited island, heading inward. Armani glanced around, searching as if combing through the area, and muttered,
It should be somewhere around here.
From their conversations over the past few days, Turan had learned that this island was something of a secret retreat for the young mermaid. Whenever life in the mermaid community, or as Armani called it, the mermaid kingdom felt too stifling, he would occasionally come here to walk around, and it was during one such visit that he had discovered it in an underwater cave deep within the island. It was almost comical to imagine that, in his rush to report the find to his father the king, he had barely gotten anywhere before being caught by the pirate's fishing hook.
I found it. Over here.
Armani exclaimed, pointing at a small pond.
There.
Turan asked.
That's right. You just need to go inside. But can you breathe underwater?
I can't.
Perhaps a noble of the Carmine bloodline might have the ability to breathe underwater, but such powers were not granted to Turan.
It's not that deep, right?
It's about 100 meters.
All right, that's manageable. Wait here.
Turan took the chains he had brought from the boat and tightly secured Armani to a nearby tree. The mermaid boy, who had been quietly watching, suddenly shouted in alarm.
Wait a second.
What now?
If you suffocate and die in there, won't I also starve to death, tied up here?
Let's hope that doesn't happen, for both our sakes.
After ensuring that the restraints were completely secure, Turan removed all his clothes except for a pair of undergarments and the guardian bracelet, then strapped a dagger to his waist. Taking a deep breath to inflate his stomach until it expanded, he dove straight into the pond. First he created a thin barrier over his eyes to keep the water from obstructing his vision, then propelled himself downward, using the same technique he had used to steer the boat earlier. He estimated he could sustain this state for 20 to 30 minutes without much difficulty. As he scanned the bottom of the pond, it didn't take long for him to spot a hole leading downward. It seemed likely to be the underwater cave that connected to the sea. As he descended further, relying on the flow of water to guide him, his ears began to ache slightly. Other than that, however, it was fairly bearable. He thought that if he ever had the leisure, he should properly learn how to move underwater. Mastering such skills would significantly reduce the amount of magic power needed. Not that he knew whether he'd have to enter the water again in the future. After descending to the bottom, he scanned his surroundings and something came into view. The deep sea at night was pitch black, with not a single point of light. But for Turan, a descendant of the Zahar bloodline, darkness posed no obstacle. In the distance, he saw the enormous figure of a creature. Even knowing that it was not alive, its sheer presence was enough to send shivers down his spine. It was the shape of a monstrous beast. Its body was several meters thick, and its length appeared to stretch nearly 100 meters as it lay coiled in place, long dead. So much time had passed that layers of green moss had grown over it, making it resemble part of the terrain unless closely observed. As he slowly moved upward along its massive body, he finally reached its head. The 4 horns protruding from its head and the rows of teeth packed tightly within its gaping mouth made its form more reminiscent of a lizard than a snake. And there, embedded deep into the center of its skull, was a figure with its hand thrust into it. Turan, forgetting for a moment that he was underwater, let out an exclamation, a trail of bubbles escaping his lips. The figure appeared to be an ordinary human male on the surface, but, like the great sea serpent, his entire body was covered in moss. Surprisingly, aside from the chest which had been pierced by a broken fang, the man's body showed no signs of decay or damage, perfectly preserved, even though the armor he must have originally worn had largely disintegrated over time. The man looked about 30 years old and, as Armani had described, had blue hair. His wide-open eyes lacked focus, but they gave the impression that he might come to life at any moment. And just as Armani had mentioned, other than that, he appeared to be an extraordinarily ordinary human. For a moment, Turan considered channeling magic to a stack, but the thought felt too irreverent, and he abandoned the idea. If this truly was a god, it went without saying that it would be sacrilegious. But even if it wasn't a god and was merely a powerful wizard, wasn't this someone who had died fighting the great sea serpent, a foe of humanity? As a descendant, he did not want to discard even the minimum respect due to such an ancestor. It was common knowledge that those who possessed magic power would transform into undead spirits upon death. Yet the fact that neither of the 2 who had perished in this underwater battle had turned into an undead spirit was peculiar. At the very least, if someone had come here earlier and absorbed their magic power, they would have naturally taken this mysterious artifact as well. Was it because they truly were divine beings, or was there some other reason? Out of curiosity, Turan attempted to absorb the artifact's magic power, but nothing came forth. If he had managed to obtain the power of entities as immense as these, he would have grown several, perhaps dozens, of times stronger in an instant. Setting aside the unanswered questions, Turan etched the man's face and appearance firmly into his memory. The color of his hair and eyes, the shape of his facial features, the colors and design of the barely discernible remnants of his armor. Later, he could investigate whether there were any myths or records of gods in other regions that bore a resemblance to this being. After spending several minutes committing the image to memory, he shifted his attention to the purpose that had brought him here. The likelihood that this man, god or wizard, was Turan's direct ancestor was slim. Nevertheless, Turan offered this silent courtesy before checking the man's waist. The round, unidentified metallic object was barely clinging to a partially decayed belt. It gleamed as though it had somehow escaped the passage of time unscathed. The question now was whether he could actually take the object with him. Hadn't Armani said that when he tried to touch it, some unknown force had repelled him? However, contrary to Armani's account, the round metal object allowed Turan to touch it easily. At that moment, an unfamiliar sensation passed through his fingers. It felt as though something extended from the metal and began searching inside Turan's body for something. A few seconds later, a metallic click echoed faintly in his mind. The moment he heard it, he instinctively understood. Though he couldn't grasp the details, the process just now had somehow established that the object now belonged to him. Up until that moment, he had been skeptical. But now he was beginning to believe that this object might truly be a sacred relic. There were numerous legends about extraordinary treasures choosing their owners. Having obtained the item, Turan felt his breath running short and began heading back the way he came. After swimming for about a minute, he spotted the moonlight filtering through the water. But just then, a strange foreign sensation washed over him, difficult to define using any of the five senses. He instinctively sensed that something was up there, near the edge of the pond. Turan broke the surface, gasping.
Did you find it? Did you?
For now.
As he replied and tried to steady his labored breathing, the knight looked at Armani and realized that the strange sensation he had just felt was coming from the young mermaid. Not only that, but when he looked at Armani with his own eyes, he saw something mysterious inside the boy's body. A faint light, pale blue in color, weak and flickering as though it could extinguish at any moment. It spread faintly across Armani's webbed ears, the gills on his neck, and the area around what seemed to be his heart. The reason for this phenomenon wasn't hard to deduce. The round piece of metal still clutched tightly in his left hand. It was undoubtedly caused by this object, whether it was a sacred relic or some kind of magic artifact.
What is it?
Armani asked.
Nothing.
After stepping onto dry land, Turan evaporated all the water from his body and put on his clothes. Then he immediately placed the round metal object on the ground. As soon as he separated himself from the object, the faint light within Armani's body disappeared, and the peculiar sensation of perceiving his presence vanished as well. It seemed the artifact had at least two functions. First, detecting the presence of living beings nearby. Second, sensing something within those living beings. What exactly that something was would require further investigation.
So now?
Yeah. You're free to go.
With a simple wave of his hand, the chains binding Armani made a metallic clinking sound as they fell away instantly. Despite being freed, the mermaid prince hesitated instead of diving straight into the water.
Why?
Turan asked.
No, it's just, I didn't think you'd let me go so easily.
You thought I'd take this, and then try to capture you again, to sell you off.
To be honest, yes.
I gave my word.
It was only right to kill non-human races that preyed on humans. But since this one claimed to have never eaten humans, Turan didn't feel the need to kill him. Besides, Armani had faithfully guided him to the artifact without any tricks. In return, Turan believed it was only proper to honor his side of the deal. This was the moral code his mother had taught him. Treat others as you would want to be treated.
Thank you, kind devil. If I ever end up fighting humans, I'll ask my father to leave you alone.
Stop with the nonsense.
After glancing back several times, Armani finally threw himself into the pond where Turan had just been diving. With a splash, bubbles rose as the shape of a small juvenile shark could be seen diving deep into the water. It seemed the claim that he was royalty among the mermaids wasn't a lie after all. In hindsight, the boy had been honest from start to finish. As Turan walked toward the spot where he had docked the boat, he fiddled with the round metal object in his hand. Figuring out what this artifact truly was seemed like it would turn into a rather enjoyable task. On the way back, Turan, the young night wizard, sat in the boat and carefully observed the mysterious treasure he had newly acquired. Its size was just right to fit in the palm of his hand. The edges were rounded, and the front and back were relatively flat, making its overall shape somewhat similar to the compass he carried. A notable feature was the small button on one side, which made a clicking sound and opened the lid when pressed. The inside was completely empty, giving no clue as to its purpose, but it likely had some function nonetheless. Fortunately, it wasn't necessary to hold this item by hand to use it. As long as it was in one's possession, tucked into a pocket, say, it could exert its abilities at any time. Closing his eyes, Turan sensed the countless presences moving beneath the sea. A group of tiny sparks, perhaps numbering in the hundreds, a slightly larger cluster of lights, numbering in the tens, and then larger lights moving separately from one another. His detection range was typically around a dozen meters, but when he focused, it could extend to several dozen meters, even reaching up to 100 or more. After practicing his detection ability several times, Turan pulled out his compass again, confirmed his direction, and set off eastward. He sailed the boat for about an hour. When he used the detection magic human detection for the 5th time, he finally caught a faint trace of human scent in the distance.
Got it.
Without making a sound, he steered his small boat to dock alongside the Blue Marlin and jumped directly onto the deck. The sailor on duty, who had been watching, stumbled back in fright at the sight of him.
Hey, Mon? No, it's Sir Knight. We thought you were staying on the island.
I had some business to take care of.
The sailor, much like Armani, had a very faint flame residing in his heart, but everything else about him was entirely ashen. Was it due to the difference in their races? Or perhaps because that one was royalty and thus different in some way? Receiving a polite salute, Turan returned to the cramped cabin and lay down on the bed. His head felt unusually heavy, likely due to the sheer number of things he had to think about. The next day, Turan slept in until the sun was high in the sky. He was awakened by a peculiar smell, the strong scent of blood. This wasn't the middle of the ocean, so why would blood suddenly be spilled on an island where many trade ships were anchored? When he went up to the deck, he quickly found the answer. Sailors were groaning and bleeding profusely from their backs. Nearby, the bosun, Renak, was chewing on some unknown herb, swinging a blood-stained whip through the air to raise a sharp crack.
All right, everyone, shout it out. Lateness.
Is forbidden.
Defiance.
Means death.
The sailors, with grim expressions, responded to Renak's words as if reciting a refrain.
What on earth is going on here?
The first mate, Osban, who had been watching the whipping with an indifferent expression, answered,
We're punishing the guys who came back late after partying last night.
Come to think of it, the captain had mentioned something along those lines before Turan left yesterday, but he hadn't thought they'd actually resort to whipping just for coming back late. Turan stared at the blood-streaked deck for a long moment before shaking his head. Someone could easily die at this rate, but stepping in to break their rules wouldn't be wise either. They had their own regulations, after all, and more importantly, the sailors themselves had seemed to agree to this punishment the previous day. Instead, Turan focused his vision, enhanced by the sacred relic, to observe how the other sailors appeared. There weren't many major differences, but those who had been whipped had areas where their blue flames had turned red and scattered slightly.
What about the captain?
He's gone ashore.
Osban said.
Said he's looking for someone to buy the ship.
I see.
As the owner of the ship, Turan headed to the island to check on the progress of events, leaving behind the sailors still being whipped. Miguel Island was a place that thrived on the trade ships docking there for supplies during their journeys. Naturally, many of the people visible on the streets were sailors from the ships anchored at the harbor. Even in broad daylight, there were drunken men with unfocused eyes shouting nonsense, some retching at the roadside, others shamelessly relieving themselves on the street. It almost made Turan think that, at least on the mainland, they had maintained a minimum level of decency. Walking past such sailors, he made his way toward the center of the island, where a relatively tidy and large building came into view, a high-class tavern, exclusive to captains. As he approached, a burly doorman guarding the entrance extended his hand with a look of disbelief.
Hey, this isn't a place for brats like you. If you miss your mommy's milk, go find one of the whores over there.
Instead of replying, Turan lightly snapped his fingers, igniting a small flame. The doorman's face turned pale. Without hesitation, Turan walked past the now bowing man and entered the tavern.
Is that really true? I'm telling you, at least tens of thousands of people fled from there. It's likely to remain a land of death for some time.
Captain Pyers was seated in one corner of the tavern, engrossed in conversation with another captain who seemed to be about his age. Noticing Turan's approach, Pyers was startled and quickly bowed his head.
Sir Turan.
Good morning.
Well, it's a bit late for morning.
Pyers gestured to the man beside him.
Ah, this here is Captain Samudel of the Winter Raven. Unlike me, he is both the captain and owner of his ship, and he's the one who plans to buy your ship.
Samuel, a middle-aged man wearing a pointed tricorn hat, inclined his head. Unlike Pyers, he had both eyes intact, but his left hand had been replaced with a hook.
Pleased to meet you, Sir Turan.
Was having a physical impairment a qualification for becoming a captain? Or perhaps working as a sailor long enough to become a captain inevitably led to injuries like these?
Nice to meet you. So what's the price?
We agreed on 1,000 Zahar gold coins for the ship and all the miscellaneous items inside it. Having never seen a Zahar gold coin, Turan couldn't be certain whether this was a fair price. However, since he had promised Pyers a share of the profits, it was unlikely to have been sold for a ridiculously low amount. Turan nodded and naturally took a seat.
Where are you coming from, Samuel?
I'm coming from the Enril Desert. My destination is Abacha, so you could say my route is the exact opposite of his. Coincidentally, I was planning to purchase another ship in Abacha, so I'm glad I found one at a good price.
Oh.
Samuel, perhaps having heard a bit about Turan from Pyers, didn't underestimate him for his youth and answered with sincerity. After sharing light conversation for a few minutes, nibbling on the salty ham and dates placed on the table, Turan brought up the real matter at hand.
Would it be possible to purchase something like a magic artifact? Or even a small item of equivalent value would be fine.
Samuel's expression turned puzzled, and Turan explained his situation. He was currently traveling alone, which made it impractical to carry such a large sum of money. After hearing the details, Samuel quickly provided an answer.
There won't be anyone here who has something like that. You'd probably need to go as far as Komad to find it.
Although Miguel Island was a key hub for trade in the North Sea, it was ultimately just a stopover for eating and drinking. The island itself was too small, and its economy wasn't developed enough to support the presence of such items. In fact, the native islanders lived by selling alcohol and their bodies to the sailors, and they weren't particularly wealthy. Compared to this, Komad, the port city north of the Enril Desert and the Blue Marlin's destination, was the second largest city in the lands of Zahar. As such, it was highly likely that the item Turan was looking for could be found there.
If you'd like, I could write you a letter of recommendation. I have some ties to the House Dearman, who govern Komad. They possess the beast tamer bloodline, so you might even be able to purchase a trained magical beast.
Hearing this, Turan immediately thought of Ashiz's horse, Tilly. That horse had also been trained by a noble with the beast tamer bloodline, purchased by the House Berg, and given to Ashiz as a gift. If it were a creature as powerful and intelligent as that brilliant red horse, it wouldn't be a bad idea to raise one.
I appreciate the offer, but...
Understanding that Turan's hesitation was essentially asking why Samuel would write him such a letter, the captain grinned.
I know that with the payment I'm giving you, Sir Turan, you'll have the means to afford a trained magical beast. I'm just facilitating the deal between the seller and buyer, so don't feel burdened by it.
2 days later, the Blue Marlin set sail once more after replenishing its supplies of food and water. Except for some of those who had been whipped, both the physical and mental health of the crew had fully recovered. With roughly 2/3 of the voyage completed by now, the sailors' morale wasn't bad at all.
This voyage is actually not too shabby. The pirates turned into our purse. The weather's been fantastic. It's all thanks to hosting a descendant of the gods.
Hearing such chatter from the laughing sailors must have displeased someone, for by the 3rd day of sailing, dark clouds began gathering thickly on the horizon. The second mate, who happened to be on duty at the time, spotted the ominous clouds and immediately alerted those around him.
Storm clouds ahead. Prepare yourselves.
The sailors, seasoned by years of enduring the unpredictable weather of the North Sea, quickly began readying the ship for the storm. The bosun, Renak, instructed them to loosen the lines and lower the sails, while the helmsman swallowed hard and gripped the wheel tightly. Others, such as the cook, hurried to move items stored on the deck down into the hold, though the storage below was already full. But weather is always more unpredictable than expected. Before preparations could be completed, lightning and torrential rain began to pour down in earnest. In this season, such rainstorms could steal body heat in an instant, as if snow could fall at any moment. The sailors, their lips turning blue, shivered uncontrollably, but still did their best to fulfill their tasks. Then a massive wave struck the side of the ship with tremendous force. A sailor who had climbed the tallest mast to loosen the ropes was flung backward by the impact, his scream cutting through the storm as he flew through the air. Whether he fell onto the deck from such a great height or into the sea, The result was the same. Death was inevitable. In that moment, as everyone's faces froze in shock, the sailors' plummeting bodies suddenly came to a halt. A stunned silence gripped the crew.
This way.
Following Turan's command and gesture, the sailors' bodies slowly descended back onto the deck. From a wizard's perspective, an ordinary person who lacked magical power was no different from an animal or an inanimate object. In other words, moving a person was no more difficult than moving a stone of similar size.
Get below deck.
Yes, sir. After rescuing one person, Turan's efforts continued. Using ropes and sails controlled by his magic, he secured the sail that had been left unrolled due to the previous mishap, and pushed the cargo rolling across the deck back into place. In the process, he also saved 2 more sailors who had slipped and were about to be thrown overboard. Once Turan confirmed that all the sailors except for the helmsman had moved below deck, he followed them down and shut the door behind him. Though it had only been a short amount of time, the extreme tension left him releasing a long, slow breath.
Thank you, my lord. Truly thank you.
As if in worship, the sailor who had been flung through the air earlier knelt down and wept profusely.
You're not hurt, are you?
No, sir.
Good. That's all that matters.
After patting the sailor on the shoulder and consoling him lightly as he repeatedly expressed his gratitude, Turan went to find Captain Pyers. Pyers was engaged in a serious discussion with the other senior sailors, but when Turan approached, they stopped talking. Pyers bowed deeply and expressed his thanks.
Thank you, Sir Turan. Thanks to you. Not only the sailors, but all of us were able to survive. If we hadn't lowered the sails in time, we likely would have sunk by now.
I'm just another sailor on this ship for the time being, so I simply did what was necessary. Do you think the ship will endure the storm?
We have no choice but to trust the ship and the helmsman's skill. My officers and I will have to take turns going out to assist. More than that, I'm worried about everyone being so soaked.
The cargo that had been stored on the deck was all brought down to the cabin, leaving no space to even step. The sailors, shivering violently in their soaked clothes as the cold seeped into their bodies, were huddling together to share their body heat. Turan silently observed the situation. Then he raised his voice, amplified through a rudimentary imitation of the sound projection magic he had once seen the head of House Arabian use during public appearances. Though far cruder in execution, it was enough to carry his words to every corner of the cabin.
Everyone, form a circle. I will light a fire now. Gather around me.
Pyers stepped forward, his expression troubled.
Sir Turan, if you light a fire here, it could be disastrous.
If the ship shook and the fire accidentally spread to the walls, it would result in a catastrophe.
It's fine. I have a way to light a fire without it spreading.
Is that even?
Pyers fell silent. He knew better than anyone that the wizard standing before him was a noble-level powerhouse. After ensuring that all the sailors had gathered in a circle, Turan conjured a flame in his hand. Because he had secured his stance firmly, the flame remained steady even as the ship rocked. At the same time, he manipulated the flow of the air, spreading the heat evenly in all directions. Warmth began to fill the cabin, thawing the sailors' frozen bodies.
Oh gods!
The sailors stared at Turan, holding the fire and radiating warmth, with mesmerized expressions. This was a completely different kind of emotion from the exhilaration they had felt just a few days ago when they watched him massacre the pirates with overwhelming power. Humans serve wizards, and wizards rule over and care for humans. For the first time in their lives, the sailors felt that they were being cared for by a wizard.